The script for Bus Stop landed on Marilyn Monroe's desk in late 1955, and for the first time in years, she read a screenplay that made her cry. Not tears of frustration at playing another variation of the dumb blonde, but tears of recognition. Chérie, the character she'd be playing, was damaged and vulnerable, and trying desperately to make something of herself despite having no resources and no support system. Chérie was from the Ozarks, working as a saloon singer in a cheap Arizona nightclub, wearing cheap clothes and too much makeup, trying to survive on dreams that were already dying. And Marilyn thought, I know this woman. I've been this woman. This wasn't another Lorelei Lee, another character who was playing dumb. This was someone who was actually struggling, actually broken, actually real. For the first time in her Hollywood career, Marilyn Monroe was being offered a dramatic role that would let her show what she could actually do as an actress. She accepted immediately. And then she worked harder preparing for that role than she'd worked for anything in her life. Because she knew this was her chance to prove she wasn't just a pretty face, wasn't just good for comedies, wasn't just the blonde bombshell. This was her chance to show she was a real actress. And she was determined not to waste it. The preparation for Bus Stop started months before filming began. Marilyn had been studying at the Actors Studio in New York with Lee Strasberg, learning method acting techniques, working on emotional recall and character development. She took that training seriously, not as a publicity stunt but as genuine craft development. For Chérie, she studied Ozark accents for weeks, listening to recordings, practicing until the dialect was natural. She researched small-town saloon singers, understanding their desperation and limited options. She thought deeply about who Chérie was underneath the cheap costume and heavy makeup. A woman who'd started with dreams and watched them shrink year by year until survival was the only goal left. Marilyn understood that intimately. She'd lived a version of that life before Hollywood found her. So when she approached playing Chérie, she wasn't reaching for something foreign. She was reaching back to parts of herself she usually kept hidden. Director Joshua Logan recognized immediately that Marilyn was bringing something special to this role. During early rehearsals, he saw her inhabit Chérie completely, not just memorizing lines, but understanding the character's entire psychology. Her motivations, her pain, her desperate hope that this latest man, the cowboy played by Don Murray, might be her ticket to something better. Logan, who'd worked with some of the finest actors in theater and film, was impressed. "She's not playing this character," he told the crew. "She is this character. That's real acting." And he made sure the film would showcase that, giving Marilyn scenes where she could demonstrate range and vulnerability that audiences had never seen from her before. The most crucial scene in Bus Stop is Chérie's performance of That Old Black Magic at the Blue Dragon Cafe. It's early in the film, establishing who this character is before the main plot kicks in. Chérie is slightly drunk, wearing a cheap showgirl costume with a revealing top and fishnet stockings, too much makeup trying to hide too many hard years. She's performing for a rowdy crowd that's barely paying attention, singing a romantic song while looking utterly alone and defeated. The scene is heartbreaking because you can see Chérie trying to maintain some shred of dignity and hope, while the reality of her situation, cheap club, disinterested audience, a life going nowhere, crushes her. Marilyn played that scene with such naked vulnerability that the crew watching the monitors went silent. This wasn't glamorous movie star performance. This was raw and real and deeply sad. This was what real acting looked like. Filming Bus Stop was challenging in all the ways Marilyn's previous films had been. She struggled with punctuality, had difficulty with line memorization, needed many takes to get scenes right. But the difference was that Logan understood she wasn't being difficult out of unprofessionalism. She was being perfectionist out of fear. This role mattered so much to her that the pressure became paralyzing. Every scene felt like it could be the one that proved she deserved to be taken seriously, or the one that proved she was just a pretty face trying to play at being an actress. Logan was patient, giving her the takes she needed, talking her through the emotional blocks, recognizing that her insecurity came from caring deeply about the work. And when Marilyn finally nailed a difficult scene, Logan would tell her, "That's it. That's perfect. You're a real actress, Marilyn. Don't let anyone tell you different. But wait until you hear what happened when the film was released, and critics finally saw what Marilyn could do. Because their response was everything she'd hoped for. And their response changed absolutely nothing about her career. Bus Stop premiered in August 1956, and the critical reception for Marilyn's performance was overwhelmingly positive. Variety called her acting vastly improved and said she effectively dispels criticism, labeling her as just another hourglass. The New York Times wrote, "Hold on to your chairs, everybody, and get set for a rattling surprise. Marilyn Monroe has finally proved herself an actress." Time magazine praised her dreamy, drifting, and utterly beguiling performance. Bosley Crowther, one of the most influential critics of the era, wrote that she gave the most accomplished and authentic film performance of her career. These weren't polite reviews throwing her a bone. These were serious critics acknowledging that Marilyn Monroe had demonstrated genuine acting talent, that she'd taken on a challenging dramatic role and succeeded completely. She'd proved what she'd been trying to prove for years. She could act. She wasn't just a movie star who happened to be beautiful. She was a legitimate actress who could inhabit complex characters and deliver emotionally authentic performances. Marilyn read those reviews with tears streaming down her face. This was what she'd wanted her entire career, to be taken seriously as an actress, to have critics acknowledge that she had talent beyond her looks, to prove to everyone who'd dismissed her as a dumb blonde that she was capable of real artistry. She called her acting coach, told him the reviews, thanked him for helping her develop the skills to pull off this performance. She called friends and shared the validation she'd been seeking. For a brief, shining moment, Marilyn Monroe believed that she'd finally broken through, that this would be the turning point where Hollywood would start offering her the kinds of serious, dramatic roles she'd always wanted to play. She thought Bus Stop had changed everything. She was wrong. The next script 20th Century Fox sent to Marilyn Monroe after the success of Bus Stop was for a musical comedy where she'd play, surprise, a beautiful, naive showgirl. It was essentially the same character she'd played in multiple previous films, with slight variations. Nothing challenging. Nothing that would let her use the skills she'd demonstrated in Bus Stop. Just another sexy blonde role designed to make money at the box office by giving audiences exactly what they expected from Marilyn Monroe. When she read it, Marilyn felt something inside her break. She'd just given the best performance of her career. Critics had praised it. The film had been commercially successful, too. Bus Stop made money, so it wasn't like Fox could claim that dramatic Marilyn didn't sell tickets. She'd proved she could do serious work and make the studio money. And their response was to ignore all of that and put her right back in the box labeled dumb blonde comedies. Marilyn refused the script. She went to the studio executives and said she wanted to be considered for dramatic roles. Wanted to work with serious directors on substantial films. Wanted to build on what she'd accomplished with Bus Stop. The executives listened politely and then explained the business reality to her. Audiences loved her in comedies. That's what they paid to see. The studio had invested millions building her image as the sexy, fun blonde. Why would they undermine that investment by changing her image now? Bus Stop was a success, they acknowledged, but that didn't mean they should abandon the formula that had made her the biggest box office draw in Hollywood. They wanted her to keep doing what she did best, play variations of the Marilyn Monroe character everyone loved. Marilyn tried to argue that Bus Stop proved she could do more, that limiting her to one type was wasting her potential. The executives shrugged. Potential wasn't profitable. The Marilyn Monroe they'd created was profitable. That was the only calculation that mattered. This is where the story gets heartbreaking, because Marilyn had done everything right. She'd studied at the actor's studio, developing real craft. She'd prepared extensively for the role, doing all the character work and accent training that serious actors do. She'd given a performance that critics praised and audiences responded to. She'd proved definitively that she was capable of dramatic acting. And none of it mattered. Because the system didn't care about her growth or her potential or her artistic ambitions. The system cared about maintaining a profitable formula. And Marilyn Monroe, as a dramatic actress, however talented she might be, was risky and unknown. Marilyn Monroe as the sexy blonde in comedies was safe and proven. Hollywood chose safe. They always chose safe. What makes this particularly cruel is that Marilyn wasn't asking to never do comedy again. She loved comedy. She knew she was good at it. She just wanted variety. She wanted to be able to do a comedy one year and a drama the next, to show range, to develop as an actress, to not be trapped playing essentially the same character in slightly different settings for her entire career. That's not an unreasonable request. That's what most actors want, the opportunity to grow and challenge themselves. But for Marilyn, who'd been so successfully branded as one specific type, even that moderate amount of variety was considered too risky by the studio. The frustration and disappointment Marilyn felt after Bus Stop went deeper than just career disappointment. It was the realization that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she improved, no matter what she proved she could do, she would always be seen primarily as Marilyn Monroe the sex symbol rather than Marilyn Monroe the actress. The critical acclaim for Bus Stop hadn't changed how the industry saw her. It had just been a momentary acknowledgement that yes, she could act, but that didn't mean they were going to let her act in roles that strayed too far from the established formula. She'd broken out of the box for one film, had shown what she was capable of, and then been firmly pushed back into the box for every film that followed. Director Joshua Logan, watching what happened to Marilyn's career after Bus Stop, was frustrated on her behalf. He gave interviews saying she was a genuine talent who deserved better roles, who could handle dramatic material as well as comedic. He said Hollywood was wasting her by refusing to let her develop. But Logan didn't control what roles Marilyn was offered. The studio did. And the studio had made their decision. Marilyn Monroe would keep playing sexy blondes in comedies because that's what made money. Everything else, her talent, her ambitions, her growth as an actress, was secondary to that commercial calculation. There's a particular poignancy to watching Bus Stop now, knowing what happened afterward. You can see Marilyn Monroe giving everything she had to this performance, pouring her heart into playing Chérie with honesty and vulnerability, believing that if she just proved she could do serious dramatic work, doors would open. And they did briefly. Critics noticed. Audiences responded. But the doors shut again almost immediately, because Hollywood wasn't interested in a Marilyn Monroe who challenged expectations. They wanted a Marilyn Monroe who confirmed expectations. They wanted her to keep being the fun, sexy blonde who made them money, not the serious actress who might be equally talented but represented, a departure from the established brand. What's particularly frustrating is that Bus Stop proved there was an audience for dramatic Marilyn. The film was financially successful. People didn't stay away because she wasn't playing her usual type. They came and they responded to her performance. So the studio's excuse that audiences only wanted comedy Marilyn wasn't even true. But the inertia of an established image, the resistance to change, the fear of taking even minor risks, those forces were stronger than box office evidence. It's easier to keep doing what's worked than to try something new, even when the something new has already shown signs of working. Marilyn did eventually get to do more dramatic work, The Prince and the Showgirl in 1957, Some Like It Hot in 1959, which was comedy but allowed her more range, and finally The Misfits in 1961, written specifically for her by Arthur Miller as a dramatic vehicle. But those were exceptions fighting against the tide of what the industry wanted from her. And by the time The Misfits came out, Marilyn was so worn down by fighting the system, so exhausted from battling to be taken seriously, so damaged by addiction and depression, that her performance, while good, couldn't carry the cultural weight of finally proving she was a serious dramatic actress. The moment for that had been Bus Stop in 1956, when she was healthy enough and hungry enough to give the performance of her life, and hungry for the validation that came with critical acclaim. That was when the doors should have stayed open. That was when Hollywood should have recognized her range and given her opportunities to keep developing it. Instead, they took the lesson of Bus Stop and learned exactly the wrong thing from it. They learned that Marilyn could occasionally do a dramatic role successfully, so they could throw her one every few years as a treat or a concession when she fought hard enough for it. But mostly, they'd keep her in her lane, keep her playing variations on the established Marilyn Monroe type, keep extracting maximum commercial value from the image they'd built. Marilyn's talent became a fun fact about her rather than the defining feature of her career. Did you know Marilyn Monroe could actually act? Became a trivia question rather than common knowledge, because the bulk of her filmography didn't showcase that skill. There's a scene in Bus Stop where Chérie, bruised and exhausted and trapped, says to the cowboy pursuing her, "I just want to be treated with respect. I just want people to see me as I am, not as what they want me to be." Marilyn playing that scene wasn't just playing a character. She was speaking for herself. That's what she wanted from Hollywood, from directors, from studios, from audiences, to be seen as she actually was, a talented actress capable of range and depth, not just as the image they'd projected onto her. Bus Stop was her attempt to show them who she really was as a performer. And they looked at her brilliant performance and said, "Great! Now go back to being what we want you to be." The tragedy of Marilyn Monroe's career isn't that she couldn't act. Bus Stop proved definitively that she could. The tragedy is that proving she could act wasn't enough to change how the industry treated her. She'd climbed the mountain, reached the summit, looked out at the view of what her career could be if they let her develop as an actress, and then been told to climb back down and stay in the valley where she was commercially safe. That's not a failure of talent. That's a failure of an industry that valued brand consistency over artistic growth, that chose profitable formulas over creative development, that saw actors as products to be marketed rather than artists to be nurtured. There are specific scenes in Bus Stop that showcase just how good Marilyn's performance was, and they're worth examining because they reveal technique and skill that her detractors always claimed she didn't have. In the scene where Chérie first meets Beau, the cowboy, she's tired and wary, having dealt with aggressive men before. Marilyn plays the moment with perfect layered complexity. Chérie is attracted to Beau's attention but also frightened by his intensity, flattered but also exhausted, hopeful but also realistic about how these things usually end for women like her. All of that is communicated through Marilyn's face and body language without a single word of dialogue spelling it out. That's sophisticated acting. That's showing instead of telling. That's what good actors do when they trust themselves and their audience. Or consider the scene where Chérie, having been essentially kidnapped by Beau, sits on the bus contemplating her situation. She's wearing his jacket, which is too big for her. She's physically exhausted and emotionally depleted. And Marilyn plays the moment with such quiet defeat, such bone-deep tiredness, that you can feel the weight of all the bad decisions and limited options that led to this point. There's no melodrama, no big emotional display. Just a woman at the end of her rope still trying to figure out how to survive. That level of naturalistic performance was unusual for 1950s Hollywood, especially from an actress primarily known for comedy. Marilyn was doing method acting before most American film actors had fully embraced it, bringing a level of psychological realism to Chérie that elevated the entire film. The physical transformation Marilyn underwent for the role also demonstrated commitment that went beyond what was required. She insisted on looking less glamorous, on wearing cheaper clothes, on having her makeup applied in a way that looked like Chérie had done it herself badly, rather than having a Hollywood makeup artist make her flawless. She wanted the audience to see a real person, not a movie star playing dress-up. The studio fought her on some of these choices. They wanted her to still look like Marilyn Monroe, even while playing a down-on-her-luck saloon singer. But Marilyn held firm. She understood that Chérie's authenticity depended on not being too beautiful, too perfect, too polished. The character's whole tragedy was that she had fading beauty and diminishing options. Making her look like a glamorous movie star would undercut everything the character was about. That's an actress thinking deeply about character rather than vanity. That's someone who understood that serving the story mattered more than protecting her image. The fact that Joshua Logan, the director, went on record multiple times defending Marilyn's talent and saying Hollywood was wasting her potential adds weight to the argument that she was genuinely good in this role. Logan wasn't some hack filmmaker desperate for publicity. He was a respected director who'd worked with the best actors of his generation. When he said Marilyn was the real deal, that assessment came from experience and professional judgment. He saw how hard she worked, how much she cared, how deeply she understood the character. And he was frustrated, both during filming when Marilyn's insecurity would slow down production, and afterward when the industry didn't recognize what she'd accomplished. Logan knew that Marilyn's struggles on set came from perfectionism and fear of failure, not from unprofessionalism. He knew the difference between an actor who didn't care and an actor who cared too much. Marilyn was the latter. What's particularly painful about the bus stop story is imagining what Marilyn's career trajectory might have looked like if the industry had responded differently to her performance. Imagine if after Bus Stop, she'd been offered a series of increasingly challenging dramatic roles that let her develop her craft further. Imagine if she'd worked with directors like Elia Kazan or John Huston or Sidney Lumet on serious dramatic films that showcased her range. Imagine if she'd been able to alternate between comedy and drama, the way many respected actors did, building a filmography that demonstrated versatility instead of typecasting. She might have won awards. She might have gained the artistic respect she craved. She might have been less frustrated, less desperate, less likely to self-medicate with pills and alcohol to deal with the disappointment of being perpetually underestimated. But that's not what happened. What happened was the industry looked at her brilliant performance in Bus Stop and made the calculated decision that dramatic Marilyn was less profitable than comedy Marilyn, even though Bus Stop itself had been profitable. They chose brand consistency over artistic development. They chose the safe formula over creative growth. And in doing so, they communicated to Marilyn that her hard work, her training, her talent, none of it mattered as much as maintaining the image they'd created for her. That message, delivered over and over throughout the remainder of her career, wore her down. It contributed to the depression, the addiction, the sense that nothing she did would ever be enough to change how people saw her. The irony is that if you ask film historians today to name Marilyn Monroe's best performance, many will cite Bus Stop or The Misfits, the dramatic roles, not the comedies that made her famous. In retrospect, with the benefit of being able to see her entire career in context, it's obvious that she was capable of more than Hollywood allowed her to do. But that recognition came too late. She needed it in 1956, 1957, 1958, when she was actively fighting for better roles and being told no. She needed the industry to see in real time what film scholars and critics would see decades later, that her talent exceeded her typecasting, that she was being wasted on formula films, that she deserved the opportunity to develop as a serious actress. The story of Bus Stop is ultimately about the cruelty of systems that refuse to acknowledge growth. Marilyn Monroe worked hard to become a better actress. She studied, practiced, prepared, and delivered a performance that proved she'd succeeded in developing her craft. And the system looked at that proof and said, "We don't care. We've invested too much in you being one thing to let you become something else, even if that something else is objectively better." That's not just frustrating for the individual caught in that trap. It's a waste of human potential, a squandering of talent, a failure of imagination on the part of the people controlling the industry. They had one of the most famous women in the world, willing and able to take on challenging work. And they said no because letting her grow was perceived as riskier than keeping her static. When Marilyn Monroe died in 1962, obituaries mentioned Bus Stop as evidence that she'd been more than just a sex symbol, that she'd had real acting ability that too often went unrecognized. But those posthumous acknowledgments ring hollow because the recognition came too late to matter. She'd needed that recognition in 1956 and 1957 and 1958, when she was alive and fighting for better roles and being told no over and over. She'd needed the industry to take the lesson of Bus Stop and apply it going forward, giving her the kind of varied, challenging roles that would have let her continue growing as an actress. Instead, they filed Bus Stop away as an interesting anomaly and went back to business as usual. If you watch Bus Stop today, what's striking is how completely Marilyn disappears into Chérie. There's none of the breathy voice or exaggerated mannerisms that characterized her comic roles. There's no winking at the camera or playing to her image. She's just an actress doing serious, committed, emotionally honest work. The Ozark accent is perfect. The vulnerability is real. Which city are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever done your best work only to have it ignored or underappreciated? Have you been trapped by others' expectations even after proving you're capable of more? How do you keep trying when the system refuses to see your growth? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Boulevard of Monroe for more stories about Hollywood's wasted potential, the artists who deserved better, and the frustration of being trapped by your own success. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next story.